Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with New York City-based jazz drummer Curtis Nowosad and Toronto-based keyboardist Joel Visentin. They talk about Jester Champwick, a CD called Homework, and it's their brainchild. This modern eclectic jazz duo was born out of a lifelong friendship and the necessity of pandemic-era remote collaboration. Both seek to celebrate some of the great black American composers of the 60s and 70s with an all-analog sound that is sometimes dreamy, sometimes fierce, and always groovy. Enjoy the story.
I always really enjoy the fact that musicians do circle around and remember neon jazz and want to be a part of it, and we're always very happy to show the evolution of this art form. You know, I think sometimes people get stuck in this mode of jazz happened in this one era and just kind of didn't happen after that, but it's an evolving organism that's constantly doing things, so I'm glad you reached out and we could have a chance to talk.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
For sure. And I mean, our project specifically is kind of in both camps with that, because the music is all like tuned from the 60s, but, you know, pretty modernized by like modern sensibilities and stuff.
Well, I guess that's the thing we should probably dive into in some level of inverted pyramid. Talk to me about how this came together. And I mean, you know, obviously with the tapestry of like being in a pandemic and all of that, how did all of this come together and how did we get to this point where we're on the phone right now?
This project specifically, like, I mean, Curtis and I have been friends for a very long time. I think we figured we met in 2001 when we were both living in Winnipeg, and we met at like a jazz camp, you know, which is like, neither of us were even big jazz fans at the time. It's just kind of like what you do at that age when you're into music. And, but like so when the pandemic happened, like I'm living in Toronto, Curtis lives in New York City. We've never really had a chance to have a project together, even though we both had our own bands and been doing, you know, living as musicians for many years now. So when the pandemic hit, I just decided to go buy some mics and go buy some recording gear. And I started messing around with like some synths. I have like some nice analog synths in my studio, and I have a Rhodes and stuff. So I kind of just started. I wasn't really feeling inspired to write. I was feeling more inspired to dig up music I haven't really had a chance to do anything with in a while. And the first thing I chose was Joe Henderson's Black Narcissus. And I kind of came up with a kind of synthy reimagining of it. And I just sent it to Curtis and I said, how do you feel about playing drums on this?
Yeah, and it was a resounding yes. And I was in a good position because I had been already setting up my home studio, like was already, you know, had already had some mics and everything, and had actually borrowed a big bag of mics from a friend of mine right before to do a recording project right before the pandemic hit. So I actually had these mics with me for the first few months of the pandemic. So I was in a good position to be recording from home and really kind of upping my home recording game, much like, you know, so many musicians have done over this time. So yeah, it was great to finally be able to like collaborate on something with Joel after, you know, 20 years of knowing each other. We're, you know, great friends and talk all the time and everything, but to actually be able to collaborate has been great.
What's the name mean? What does the name of the collective mean?
Yeah. So
go ahead.
Actually,
go ahead.
It's a play on a Simpsons character, ahead of sort of neck and neck with music. Our other collective love is the Simpsons. So we just basically send Simpsons quotes back and forth all day long and pretend it's a real conversation. And so, you know, we had sort of said like we wanted to find an obscure character and you know, somehow make it work for us. So there's a character, the inventor of Itchy and Scratchy, is a band named Jester Champwick, and then we took the J and the C from our names and made that. But thankfully, a lot of people haven't even asked, so it's actually been it's kind of nice. I like that it's not like you know, beating anyone over the head with it. It's just like it's just there, kind of, you know, and then there's the occasional like initiated fan who's like, who knows right away what it is, you know.
Kind of exposes us as big nerds, but I like the fact that it like, we also just were like, it'd be cool if it just sounded like a name, but then the initials of that name would be the initials of our respective first names.
Well, if you really want to go down that nerd road, your follow-up could be Soylent Green or something like that. You could really knock that out of the park.
Oh, yeah.
But, you know, you could almost do that for anything. If you have something that's kind of esoteric and you're like, what's that from? I bet 9 times out of 10 you could say it's a Simpsons reference and you'd be just fine.
Yeah.
It was just
in 30 seasons,
the Simpsons were already references to something else. So there's all kinds of like classic literature and like classic movies and things that I wouldn't have had any idea about if there hadn't been some joke on The Simpsons. And then over the years, it like the depth of it reveals itself. You know.
Yeah. Because even Soylent Green, I believe, is from an old sci-fi movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I
don't want to spoil it for anyone, but I think it's people.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, and I guess the thing that I find that's interesting about the sound you're channeling and what's going on is that at this point with the world waking up, people are going to want to move. They're going to want to groove. And you're kind of also tapping into another thing that's been very ever present during this lockdown, which has been kind of the race problem that we've had that has ballooned and exploded in America. And this music that you're celebrating is like the heart and soul and essence of that rhetoric of kind of the Black evolution of the 60s.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Black Narcissus is originally from Joe's record Power to the People, which is like one of my favorite records, and really kind of like has that, that whole aesthetic and the whole, it was very, it was message music, so really, to me, that's all very important. I mean, and, I think we talked when my last record came out, but there was had a lot of those types of themes on my last record. And, because I sort of just feel like a responsibility as an artist to, shine a light on all of these things. I feel like I feel like art has the power to disarm people, and particularly dealing with instrumental music, people can kind of interpret it however they want to interpret it. So when you really put something like that and say, like, this is exactly what I'm thinking about, and this is where we're coming from, then I think that it gives people, pause to really think about it and reflect and really want to be on the right side of history and be, and want to make this world that we're all sharing together a better place, especially after, a thing like this pandemic that affected literally everyone. It's kind of been a very dark equalizer in a way, so I'm glad.
Yeah, and I mean, both in Canada and the U.S., the pandemic affected Black people, significantly more than white people kind of across
Absolutely.
The board. Like, I think for me, it's also about, like, if I'm going to be a jazz musician, I feel like part of my mandate needs to be making sure it's very clear that jazz is a Black American art form. And so, like, the reason I chose, we chose the music that we wanted to do was that I feel like, at least this is how I've often felt in Toronto, just going to jam sessions and stuff, that the American songbook really gets more attention than the Black composers of jazz. So it's like, I feel like, get a lot more Cole Porter and George Gershwin and Rodgers and Hammerstein, which is great, but I feel like there's this incredible body of work that isn't getting the same attention. And I feel like as white performers, when we're playing Gershwin and stuff like that, I mean, it's still really great music, but part of why it was so great as a jazz art form, and specifically a Black art form, was the fact that it was a subversion of white culture. And I feel like as white musicians in Toronto, there's a bit of an alienation from, I don't know, like that subversion. So I don't know, for me it was about, like, there's this tradition of Black composers from the 60s that I really specifically want to spotlight, and I want to draw attention to the fact that, like, if anyone doesn't know, like, this is a Black art form rooted in, the fights for civil rights and racial justice.
I guess the other part of all of this is, you guys obviously recorded, a lot of people have recorded and had things that continue to go while this pandemic was going on and live music was closed down. So my question to you is, two jazz musicians on different parts of the world, and obviously from very thriving scenes, how do you see the world of jazz musicians and the collective of jazz reemerging stronger out of this pandemic?
I mean, that's a great question. I mean, it is a little interesting. I feel like we might have two slightly different perspectives, because being in New York, things are starting to open up for real, and in Canada, things are still pretty locked down. There's kind of like a third wave that has sort of kept things down.
I'm still not playing. Our clubs are closed. I'm not, there's still no dining or anything going on up here.
Yeah, which is kind of wild. It's kind of jarring to be here, and Manitoba, where we're from, is like the worst in North America right now. So it's really, there's like not a lot of access to vaccines, and so it is already it already kind of like changes the perspective. Whereas last night I was hanging out at Smalls, like listening to music, hanging out at a jam session, having a drink, so it's really kind of jarring.
It feels like you guys are in a different world than us kind of right now.
Yeah. I'm hoping that, like I'm cautiously optimistic about it, but I do, we're not out of it. When people talk about it in a past tense, it's like, it's not a past tense. We're still in it. We just happen to, be in a better place, geographically where we're at. But yeah, I mean, I do think that a lot of things that people haven't had a chance to reflect on really until everything stopped, right? I mean, I know for me, like, it was just kind of going hard nonstop until I was kind of forced to take a break by this the same way that everyone else, and I was able to actually really kind of, reflect on life and reflect on the things that, the things about my career and just about what my life looks like, and things that I wanted to improve, and things that that I can't wait to get back to, but then other things that it's like I can't wait to, like I'm happy not ever doing that again. Certain types of things. So like I think that we've all had kind of a chance to sort of assess in that kind of way. So like I'm really trying to, there were, a lot of, in amongst all this devastation and everything, I did have some positives in my own life, and just in terms of like being able to take care of myself, because I wasn't on the road all the time, and things like that I want to carry with me as stuff starts to open up. And I think that a lot of people are kind of talking about demanding better wages and better working conditions, and things that, like, we don't have to go back to the same, like $50 gigs or whatever. We're hoping that, like, but then it's also this strange dichotomy, because we're also in a time when none of us are working. So like, or we're just starting to work. So like, I'm going to probably take things that I might not have taken, prior to the thing. Like I'm ecstatic to play a restaurant gig now in a way that before I might have been too busy because I was traveling or whatever, and I would rather have a night off, So yeah, it is really interesting. It's kind of hard to answer for me, but Joel, you might have a little more insight as well.
It's tricky. I don't know whether to feel optimistic or pessimistic, and I kind of feel like depending on what day you talk to me, I have different feelings about it. Like being kind of still very much in the pandemic, like the question to me is like, are we going to come back stronger than ever, or have we lost certain things that aren't coming back? I think it's just a really big question. Like the world has definitely gone through a big shift, and for better or for worse, we're always going to be living in the post-COVID world. We've lost some clubs in Toronto, but we haven't lost all the clubs. And I do really feel like people are hungry for live music again, and in general, just like more authentic forms of connection. Like I think we can all like definitively say that Zoom has not filled or replaced the human needs that come from being gathered with people in larger numbers and seeing people face to face. And even just from what I've seen about the way people are reacting to busking and sort of outdoor musical things in the city, I'd say there's definitely going to be like a honeymoon period when things can happen again. It's just a question of how long lasting is that going to be, and like how can we sort of harness that and, I don't know, just as a musical community support each other. Because I think I felt a lot of community growth through this pandemic thing. I feel like musicians have all gone through this experience together, and I feel like we have this sense now of our community kind of supporting itself.
Well, let's bring this back down to Homework, the new EP. What do you want those that, of the myriad of options that everybody has, those that download or buy this, what do you want them to get from this artistic experience?
First and foremost, I hope they gain an appreciation for the compositions, to realize that like these 4 songs that were written in the 60s by, some of the great jazz musicians of the era wrote music that like the sort of core elements of it are so adaptable to any particular era. So I guess I hope people feel like this sounds like something that's very of the now and of sort of where modern jazz is at, and just gain an appreciation for how great those compositions are, that they can lend themselves to so many different looks and interpretations.
Yeah, I agree. And also, I hope that knowing that this was created without, either of us being in the same country, even, let alone the same room, and like being able to like collaborate in that kind of way. And despite the fact that we can't, kind of going back to what you were talking about with Zoom not really filling the void, there's a very important energy transfer that happens when people are in the same room together. And particularly when we're playing music, whether we're performing live or whether we're recording in the same room with someone else, we're exchanging all the time. We're vibrating together and all this stuff. So to be able to create what we were able to create without, with that limitation, not being able to be in the same room, I hope that people just will just appreciate that part of it as well. But I think that, just being able to like appreciate sort of the sonic landscape that we created and that Joel especially created. I mean, he mixed the record as well, and like it's an all analog type sound. So it's just, I hope that people can really appreciate that in addition to the composers and everything.
I guess musically and artistically, like I'm coming also from a place of like, I love kind of like 70s prog as well. And like, I love sort of these sort of like synthy, spacey places that you can kind of just get lost in mentally, and hopefully it just promotes some thought and introspection for the listener.
Cool. Gentlemen, thank you for taking a minute out. I really appreciate it. Good luck with the album and return to stage.
Oh, man, thank you so much, Joe. It's always a pleasure.
All right, thanks, Joe.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest cats in Kansas City, Toronto, New York City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to both Curtis and Joel for their time, music, and story. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.